Cool. So my talk is called Incomplete React, and it's completely different from my talk last year. I'm just wanting to kind of hack a little bit, show off some new APIs, but kind of let me set the stage first. So why is it called Incomplete React? Well, my talk last year was at NextConf, and it was focused on a lot of the new APIs we've gotten in React and some that have come to Next. But at this point, a lot of what's happened in React in the framework space, in Remix, whether you're using Next, whether you're not using either of them, we've gotten a lot of these new back-end primitives, right? And for a long time in React, we thought of it as a front-end library. It's really, that's its job, that's what it was introduced to solve. And we got these great primitives over, let's say, the last 10 years that give us all of these amazing libraries in the ecosystem today that let us do things like render a modal dialog just by rendering a component. And that was really hard a long time ago. React added things like create portal and context that give us these incredible APIs that us app developers can use just by rendering components. And I think that's the strongest thing that React has going for it. And this, again, works regardless of which frameworks you're using or kind of which particular setup you have. But it's always been focused on the front end. And now with things like server components and server actions and some newer things coming to React like use form state, use form status, maybe you've heard of use action state. The stage is kind of set for us to have this similar level of abstraction and these similar easy-to-use components that span both the front end and the back end. So again, we have a lot of folks who use Remix in here. We have folks who use Next. We have folks who are using React in a Create React app and an SPA. Regardless of what you think about everything going on along the framework line, I just wanted to kind of write some code with my friends who all use React and see kind of what primitives we can get that will make React really a full stack library instead of just a front end library, and see what kind of abstractions that we can end up with. So let's just take a look at some of these new ones. And I have a simple app here. This is a Next app, but I have Prisma wired up. And so if you haven't used Prisma before, it's just a little ORM. It gives you a little data layer, and I have one little model here. It's a post model. It has a title and a string. That's a string, and a content that's a string. And I have an SQLite database. So here we're at the home page. Let's go ahead and fetch all of the posts in the database. And you can see over here in Prisma Studio, I don't have any. So let's actually create one first. We're going to create a new post first because we wouldn't want to show an empty database. So let's create a new post. And let's see, this is working. So how do we do that? We do this with a form, and we have an input for the title, and we have a button that submits it called Create Post. So we've got our little form here. Of course, if we do this, nothing happens right now. But one of these new APIs that has come to React, and again has come to the frameworks as well, is action, this action prop. And so this can take in a server action because I'm using Next. Again, not really about the specifics here, but this is kind of where we've moved as a community in terms of how to kind of create data across the network here. And so all these kind of server-driven paradigms use something very similar to this. So what does an action look like? Well, let's come here and just create a new file, and we can use the use server directive to let us know that this is going to run on the server. And we'll just export an async function called create post. And so let's just log something right here, hi, and let's import create post. Just like this. And if I hit create and we look at our logs, we can see that running on the server. So that's pretty cool. And Prisma is pretty awesome. We have a little Prisma DB helper. I have my post wired up. That comes from the schema, and I can just call create. So let's go ahead and create a post with title, welcome to Miami, something like that. And we'll await that because that's an async function. And so right now we're just going to hard code that, but if I hit create and we come over and look, then we've created some data. So let's actually get the title from the form. Actions give the form data as an argument right here. So over here, this guy's actually going to get a form data. This is type form data. And so our title can be form data.get title. This is an interface that's straight from the browser. I'm sure a lot of you have used this, but this is kind of how we work with it. And so now we can just pass it in right here, just like that. And now if we say post to and hit create, then we come over here and we see that's in our database. Pretty cool. So now we have the data in our database. Let's go ahead and fetch the data in our page and display it. We're going to await the DB, and this is going to find many. This is just Prisma's way to get all the posts. So this is going to give us a post object here, and then right down here, let's have a little divider, and let's map over each post. And we will render a div with a key, and we'll say post.title, something like that. Pretty cool. Now, this is pretty easy, but there's a lot of wiring it takes to just kind of go through this over and over again. And because those of us in the JavaScript ecosystem like to use the tools that we like to use, there's not a lot that we have shared across front-end and back-end setups where we can make assumptions about the shape of our data, the name of our models, the foreign key constraints that link a model to its relationships. And so you end up with a lot of abstractions like this that have become a lot easier to use than they were. And now they embrace, all of the power of the server and let us block on route navigations and create things in a protected environment without having to think about all sorts of back and forth and client-side caches and all sorts of things like that. But it's still a lot of wiring to get something like this going, right? And I used to be a Rails developer. I still write some Rails, actually. But if you've never used a framework like Rails, and I really think of Rails as a framework because it has a lot more opinions about how you're supposed to set things up. And those constraints, while they can feel limiting, and in fact, some of those constraints are what cause people to leave more opinionated frameworks like Rails to find things that would let them do things that they couldn't do within those constraints. They bought you quite a lot of power. And one of the best parts, in my opinion, of Rails is active model and the entire model layer, which makes a lot of assumptions about how you model your domain, which database tables you set up, how you name them and their fields, how you relate them with foreign keys. And one of the benefits of all that knowledge being built into Rails is this little form for helper. So when you make a form for something like an article, which is similar to our post here, Rails gives you a form with, used to be called form for. I'm aging myself, although I guess the gray in my beard does that these days. Form with, form for, form with model article, and then you just render a form text field and a title. You render a text area for the body and a submit. And that is all you do. And you basically get not only what we just made, you get a lot more because Rails knows that on your database level, the title is required, but the body is optional. And so if you tried to save this, set aside client-side validation for now, if you tried to save this and your database rejected it, you'll get an error message showing up in your HTML. And this is just the surface. If you had an article that had many comments, you can actually use, there's APIs that cover all that stuff. And you can accept nested attributes. It can basically build that graph for you altogether. So I was thinking about this when I was kind of playing around with some of these new APIs. Like, this is a server component, right? This is really cool because this is a page in our application, but we now have async server components that we can get from something like a Prisma. Prisma could ship a component that was like, a table, a model table that takes in a model name, and it just knows how to find them all. Or we could, when we use these server actions, we could have something like a form for, a form with, and pass it a model. But again, going back to why people were nudged away from some of these more opinionated server-side frameworks is that they can't do everything that we can do with like the full power of React on the client, right? So you want us to get closer to this sort of API, but not give up all the stuff that we've gotten from the composability and the primitives and the ecosystem that we've gotten in React. So this is cool, I'm rendering an input, but maybe I want to go and style this now, or I want to use one of these front-end libraries to do a little bit more. I actually have radix themes installed right here, so I can replace this p tag with a heading. And this is one of these cool like design system component type things. I can just give it a few sizes, or I can use the default. They also have an input, so they have something called a text field from radix themes. And I can have like a slot in it, or I can just render a text field. And it's going to be nice, and it's going to have my accent color from my theme. I can add a little bit of margin to the top. And I can also do a text area, right? And maybe we'll say this is going to be the content, and this is going to be the title. And this button is pretty ugly. Let's bring in the button from Radix Themes. Looks a little bit better. And this is cool. They have all these variants. We can make it like soft if we wanted to. And it respects all these colors. And this is cool because now, we can write another new post with lorem ipsum, hit save. And our form is still working. Oh, it looks like the content didn't work. Let's go ahead and update this. We will get the data is going to be both the title and the content, like that. Let's try that again. Refresh, test 3, 333. Oh, data is right. I did that so it would be easier. I actually love pair programming at conferences. It's kind of like a meetup. I used to do this all the time. Do you guys remember meetups? It was like a thing we used to do. 3, 3, 3. Boom, there we go. So this is neat. Like we have something here that's pretty cool. And you could imagine wrapping this up into something even more reusable. Let's actually make this. This can be a form from Radix UI. They have a form here. But that requires some client functionality, and they have some extra stuff here for the client features. So let's actually create a create post form. And I'm going to grab this. Sometimes I like to just do this, copy it all, return just this, because then I get my imports, remove the async, clean up the imports, boom, we got to create post form. Let's go here, create post form. Oh, I got to name it. Create post form. Every time I try to use those refactoring things in VS Code, they never work. But I always like the idea of them. And this is now client component. So this is working. We can organize those imports, get rid of that. Let's try it again. Let's see, what should we write our article about? Why the Dobermans are choosing to side with Kenny. Why are the Dobermans choosing to side with Kenny? This is, I guess, a little inside baseball if you weren't at Dax's party. Because they knew he needed backup. That's my take anyways. Let's create that post. Come over here, refresh. Okay, so that's working. That's pretty cool. So now we have this little create post form. And the cool thing about Prisma is that it generates all these types from the schema. So right here, you can look and squint at our create post form. You can see, we have a title, and it knows it should render this. It has content. Maybe it should render a text area because it's longer. You could use, if you look at DB, something like db.post.fields, this is basically a typed list introspected from the schema. And so you could imagine making this, the step from getting here to form 4, a form with and Rails, it's a lot more reasonable now. It's a lot easier to understand how you could iterate over those fields and build that up. So that's kind of just trying to give you an idea with actually building this out, how this could be something, what would it look like for Prisma to ship with something that gives us this create server action. It knows how to wire up these forms, but it doesn't take away the composability and the flexibility we like when it comes to really customizing and tweaking the front end, So that's kind of that basic part. I want to show you some of these new APIs. Does anyone have any questions so far? Again, let's just make, it's like 5 p.m., it's React Miami. Great question. How can we make the page update when we submit the form? So this is a Next app. They have their own mechanism for this, but every framework really has a kind of different answer for this. There are some new caching functions coming to React, but this way that we would do this, let me show you, but the general idea is whether you are using a framework that does more aggressive caching or less, or one that just chooses not to re-render parent parts of the layout because you make a data change here, this is kind of something that you have to think about everywhere. So the way you would do this in Next is in our create post action, we know that the db.post has changed. And so what we can do is call revalidate tag. And this is an idea called surrogate keys, which comes up a lot in back-end systems. How do you know to kind of expire cache or re-render something? This is something we can make up ourselves. And so let's call this post.all. This is like a standard way you would see a surrogate key named for a model. And again, this could come from Prisma because Prisma knows we have a post and it knows which operations mutate the posts. So if we just call revalidate post, that will revalidate the post tag. But we haven't marked our home page here, new post, with a tag yet. Well, actually, that seemed to work. Surprisingly. Did I call revalidate? Yeah, tag. Refresh. Test. Let's test again. This is also what's fun about live coding. I thought that was going to cache. Maybe not because I haven't deployed this or there's no, in development, it's just reloading. But if this was in a parent layout, let's put this in a parent layout. Let's put this in a parent layout. So let's move this up to the layout. And let's say we had it right here. Div. Let's grab the posts up here. And we're going to make this an async function. And let's grab the DB. And it doesn't like that. Async function right there. There we go. And I'm going to comment them out here. And I'll grab these from here. And let's put them in the layout. I'll put them below before, just like we did. Okay. Let's put them in this container. So there we have all of the posts. And let's try, why should you come to React Miami? To drink spicy margaritas, of course. So let's create. Why is that re-rendering? I have some other code in here, but I don't think it's actually, it's not cached. Yeah, but this layout shouldn't be re-rendering. I didn't think it would have. Let me just check really quick. Revalidate tag from next cache, use server. But it's not even using it. Because there is something that we can do. So if I refresh that and I say 222, 222, see, that doesn't rerun it. What was that? Maybe it's because I wrapped it in this capital. Let's try this lowercase form. Use client, action, button type submit. Maybe it's something with that capital form that was doing it. Oh, there we go. Now it's not. Is that correct now? Oh, it's because I don't have the revalidate tag. Let me put it back, save that. 444, 444. It's showing up for some reason. Anyways, the way this is I'm surprised. I do have a version down here. So the way that this is supposed to work is here in the layout. Next has something called unstable cache. And this lets you mark any code with a tag. And so what you can do is you can say const find all posts. And this will actually kind of break it, and it will show you when it doesn't work anymore. Const find all posts is going to be an async function, and it's going to return this. But we wrap it in unstable cache. So bring unstable cache up here. This is how we do it. Const find all posts. And here we can return db post find many. And now we can get the posts. Let posts equals await find all posts. And unstable cache, now, if we try this again, now it stops completely. And I believe that this would be the behavior by default if we had shipped it and kind of like did a production build. So now you're like, we have this initial problem. And actually, if we refresh, we don't see anything new at all. So another new one, test. We don't see it. We don't see it because in the next model, they want you to really tell the system whenever you have changed anything. And so unstable cache takes in another argument right here, which is an array of these same keys, these surrogate keys. So now I can say post all, and we can give it to tags as well, which is kind of another part where you have to do this right now. But if we mark this as a post all key, there we see the new ones are showing up. Lorem ipsum, another new one, and we hit save. Then we bust that cache, and it knows to re-render. But the cool thing about this is, again, this could be a function that comes from this lib alongside our create. The create knows to invalidate this. If we edit this, it would know how to invalidate specific models. And since we're running low on time here, I just want to jump ahead and show you some of the other things that we can do now. Let's go to V2. This is just oh, I have that in my root layout now. Let me comment this out. So this is a little bit further along, and if we look at this page, once we're in posts, we're rendering something that's just a Prisma model, and it takes in a model name. And what Prisma model does is it does a lot of similar to what we just saw. It finds all of the models, and this is coming from the lib right here. So this find all is cached. It takes a model name. These are hard coded right now, but again, you can imagine parameterizing all this. And if we look at this model, we also have we have a link going to each post in detail. And we can click into this. We can see the post. Let's look at the post page. And this is on the slug right here. This just renders the post content and title, and we can hit edit. And if we hit edit and we look, we're going to see a Prisma form. And this takes in a model name, and the actual model, which we're finding using this, all server components and server actions. I think you can even introspect what the model name is from the model that you pass in. But if you pass that into a Prisma model, or sorry, a Prisma form, you either render an edit or a create based on if the model exists or not. Here it doesn't exist, so let's go to edit. And this really is just a few more things on top of what we were already looking at. It's a form, and it's a form field and label from the radix library. And if I delete this title and I try to save it, we have a little latency, and we actually get back an error from the server. And if we look inside the lib at update, you should be able to see a lot of the same stuff we did. We have the form data, except now we're using Zod, and we just try to parse it. And if we don't, then we return the errors in the form. And what's really cool about this radix stuff is the form has this server invalid flag, and they have this form message. Whoops. They have this form message that uses like the validations API in the browser, and you can say basically if it's in an invalid state or not. This is the kind of thing you could do on the client, but I have no client validations just to demonstrate how you can use server-side validations and have it all wired up. And then this use form state is how you actually kind of get this information from your server. Action, we don't have enough time to walk through this right now, but this is going to change very soon. These two hooks are kind of coming together as use action state, but it's the same idea. And I'll post all this code so you can look at it. But this basically gives us a form here where we can save this, and we can also delete it. And when we delete it, we can show, again, a radix modal. So just because we have a really nice API from something like a Prisma form doesn't mean we don't have to give up, the radix dialogues or any of the rich UI components we have. We can delete these, and we can redirect and revalidate the list. So that was really the point of the talk, is just to get folks thinking, wouldn't it be cool if we have some opinionated setups where I can define a schema, and I can define a new model, and out of the box I have something very simple to use that comes with a lot of functionality, but it decomposes in a way that still gives me escape hatches to customize it and bring rich UI functionality in where I want it, just like we've been doing with our UI libraries in the front end. And all of these things could be generated from your schema, provided you're using the tools that know enough about each other. So that's kind of the things I'm thinking about most these days when it comes to server components, server actions, the hooks that give us the pending state and the return value. We've spent a lot of time trying to work, I feel like, towards the high part, the ceiling of our apps and the richness of the UI. But in doing so, the floor where we're starting out on together has kind of fallen a little bit compared to where, again, a lot of more conventional opinionated frameworks like Rails start. And so I think now that we have these primitives, we can start to raise that floor, and I'm really curious to see kind of how these abstractions develop over the next 3 to 5 years. So yeah, that's my talk. Thanks.